Well, you've probably heard this. The National Rifle Association is about to open a star-studded event here in Houston. It's the organization's annual convention, which will include the likes of Sarah Palin, Senator Ted Cruz, and Governor Rick Perry, among others. It comes amid a huge gun control debate that is taking place in our nation. Here to highlight some of the issues that are involved in the debate are Michelle Green with 1 Million Moms for Gun Control and Douglas Haggard, who is a Houston attorney who is opposed to some of the proposed gun control legislation. Thank you very much to both of you for coming in.
Thank you, Mike.
First of all, tell us about your organization, Michelle.
Let me first correct. Our name is Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America.
I apologize for that.
It's quite all right. It's quite all right. And our organization was established in the wake of Newtown by an Indiana mother of 5. She started a Facebook page and to promote common sense gun laws, to say there's something that there are things we can do to prevent this from happening. The group has 100,000 Facebook followers. There are 90 chapters around the country, and we're modeled after Mothers Against Drunk Driving. We support the Second Amendment and our right to own guns for self-defense, for hunting, for target shooting, but believe in common sense gun laws.
And the common sense gun laws include things like the expanded background checks that are being proposed in Washington right now. Councilor Haggard, what is your opinion on the expanded background checks? What's wrong with that?
Well, first of all, it becomes a registry of guns. And in every place that they've had registration of guns through the government has ended up in confiscation every time. Whether it was England, Australia, or Canada, the Canadians gave up their pistol registration and they seized them. They tried to do it for rifles, and the Canadian people at least rose up against that.
Why is it President Obama came out and said that it does not include a registration, and that there was language in there that prohibits a registration? So we're kind of hearing two different things. I haven't been able to read it. Most of these bills are extremely long pieces of legislation. So how do you know that there is registration in there?
It's a paper trail.
Okay.
It's a paper trail on the private transfer of firearms, and they're going to try to make some exceptions that sound good, children, relatives, but it's still a registration of firearms.
Michelle, tell us, let's talk about the Newtown massacre as a specific incident. What could be included in one of these bills that's being proposed that would have prevented Adam Lanza from getting these weapons and doing what he did? And I guess, Mike, what I'm getting to is, couldn't he, even under the new legislation, if it were passed tomorrow, couldn't he still have done what he did?
With background checks, yes. And I think what we're looking at is something that's going to be a 10 to 15-year battle. This is a marathon. Mothers Against Drunk Driving, it took them 10 to 15 years to finally reduce drunk driving incidents in this country by 70% and to change the culture around drinking and driving. And so the background checks would not, unfortunately, have prevented what happened here. But I would like to point out that the background check law that was the bill that was being proposed actually has tougher penalties for gun registration than was currently on the books. People would be imprisoned by up to 15 years in the Manchin-Toomey Compromise bill if they kept a gun registration. And the paper trail, the paper trail is the same paper trail that is currently in place. The FBI and federal authorities would have to destroy their records. I believe it's after 24 hours, and then licensed gun dealers would keep the records for the same amount of time that they do under current law.
Your response?
It's a burden on the individual owner of that property to keep those records. That would be the responsibility of the individual transferee who transfers the transferor who transfers the property. Let me say this: the Second Amendment is being used to try to get these national programs, and the Second Amendment is a prohibition against the federal government doing these things. It can be done on a state level, a federal level, or a state or local level, but the Second Amendment says the federal government, thou shalt not infringe, and that's to even go onto the fringes. And so the whole argument about the Second Amendment being available to people who want to grab guns or have gun registration is fallacious.
Michelle, many people, this is Texas, and Texas is one of the states where people value their Second Amendment rights maybe more than they do in the Northeast or some other parts of the country. The fact that it is written into the Constitution, that actually arms are specifically mentioned in the Constitution, does that mean that organizations like yours are always going to have a headwind? You're always going to be fighting that?
Listen, every part of the Constitution has limitations. The First Amendment, you're not allowed to deal in child pornography, shout fire in a crowded theater. The Supreme Court has come out and said there are limits on the Second Amendment. Justice Scalia has said this. And I think, and as far as Texas goes, listen, I grew up here. I love Texas. I am a proud Texan. In the Houston Chronicle this morning, 90% of Americans, according to a reputable Rice professor who conducts these types of studies, 90% of Houstonians support universal background checks. The majority of folks want that.
This is going to be your last opportunity to speak. Let me just ask you, do you think that the National Rifle Association would ever support any additions to the current gun laws that are on the books now?
Not under the Second Amendment. I'm not speaking for the NRA, but for myself. But mothers, for instance, in Boston recently, they had to be shut up in their homes while people with guns and bombs were going around their streets, and they were not able to protect themselves. And so it's a slippery slope. Once you break the close on the infringing, then it's downhill from there, and they've been doing this for 100 years.
Well, it's obviously something that we're not going to solve here in 3 minutes, but one thing I think we can all agree on is that the last thing we want to see is any more lives lost. The question is, how do you avoid that without infringing on people's rights? It's not an easy answer, but thank you so much for your input this morning. And we want to go back over to Melissa because a lot of friends on our Facebook page have weighed in on this subject as well.
Oh yes, Mike, you definitely have people talking on social media right now after that. What are your thoughts on gun control debate? Well, let's see what our friends are saying on Facebook. John comments, looking forward to attending the NRA convention and supporting the Constitution. Terry says, has nothing to do with guns and everything to do with control. Essa says, well, at least they're trying to do their best. Some people like guns, some people don't. But the only thing guns do is kill.